man pleads on camera for his missing family, but his eyes feel empty because Chris Watts already knew the truth. Welcome back to the channel. Tonight, we're stepping into a story that looks ordinary at first, but unravels into something deeply disturbing. A story about trust, illusion, and a kind of betrayal that feels almost impossible to comprehend. And I want you to stay with me on this, because there's a question we're going to keep coming back to. How does someone go from a quiet, ordinary father to committing something unthinkable? Hold on to that, because the answer isn't as simple as you think. It all begins in Frederick, Colorado, a peaceful suburban neighborhood, clean streets, quiet homes, the kind of place where nothing ever seems to go wrong. Inside one of those homes lived a family that, from the outside, looked perfect. A husband, a wife, 2 young daughters, and another child on the way. That husband, Chris Watts, was known as calm, reserved, almost passive. His wife, Shawn Watts, was the opposite. Outgoing, expressive, active on social media. She shared their life openly, videos, smiles, family moments that made everything look ideal. But here's where I need you to pay attention, because what you're seeing is the version of reality people choose to show, not always the truth behind it. Behind the camera, things were shifting, quietly, subtly, almost invisibly. And this is where the first crack appears. In the months leading up to August 2018, something changed in Chris Watts. He became distant, detached, less engaged with his family. At first, it didn't seem like much, just normal stress, work, responsibilities, life. But wait, here's where it gets crazy. Because while his family believed everything was fine, Chris was living a second life. He was having an affair, a relationship that offered him something different. Freedom, escape, a version of life without responsibility. And now we come back to that question. What happens when someone starts wanting a completely different life, but feels trapped in the one they already have? For most people, the answer is simple. You leave, you walk away, you face the consequences. But for Chris Watts, that wasn't the path he chose. And this is where the tension begins to build, because on the surface, nothing looks wrong. Family photos continue. Videos keep getting posted. Smiles still appear. But underneath, something is unraveling. Now imagine this. You're living in that house. Everything feels normal, routine, predictable, until one day, it isn't. August 13th, 2018. Early morning. Shawn Watts returns home from a business trip. She's tired, pregnant, expecting to walk into the safety of her home. But what happened next would change everything. We don't see it. We don't hear it. But we know the outcome. And sometimes that's what makes it even more disturbing. Hours later, Shawn and the children are gone. No calls, no messages, no trace. And this is where the story takes a turn. Because instead of panic, we get something else. That same day, Chris Watts appears on camera, speaking directly to the public, asking for help, pleading for his family to come home. But something feels off, and people notice. His tone is flat. His emotions feel rehearsed. His words don't match his body language. And here's the loop I want you to remember, because we're going to come back to this again and again. When someone is pretending, there are always cracks. You just have to know where to look. But wait, because what happens next is the moment everything starts to collapse. A neighbor steps forward. He shows police surveillance footage from that very morning. And in that footage, you see Chris Watts loading something into his truck, repeatedly, quietly, carefully. Now watch this closely, because this is where behavior tells a story words cannot. Chris is standing there, watching the footage with the police, and instead of reacting naturally, he's nervous, shifting, uneasy, like he knows what's coming. And that's the moment investigators realize this isn't a missing persons case. This is something else. Before we go further, quick pause. If this story is already pulling you in, hit that like button, subscribe for more deep, emotional true crime stories, and comment below. At this point, do you trust him? Or do you already think he's hiding something? Because what comes next will remove all doubt. Now let's go deeper. Because the truth? It's far darker than anyone imagined. Police begin digging. Phone records, messages, movements, everything. And piece by piece, a different story begins to emerge. The affair comes to light. The emotional detachment, the sudden behavioral changes. And now the question shifts from, where is his family? To, what did he do? But here's where it gets even more unsettling. Because even with all this pressure, even with evidence stacking up, Chris keeps insisting. He doesn't know anything until he breaks. And when he does, the truth that comes out is something no one was prepared for. He confesses. He admits to killing Sean and Watts. But wait, here's where it gets even darker. At first, he tries to shift the blame, claiming that Sean had harmed the children, and he reacted in anger. But that story doesn't hold. It falls apart quickly, because the evidence doesn't support it. And eventually, the full truth surfaces. He killed his wife. Then he killed his daughters. Bella Watts, Celeste Watts. Take a moment with that, because this is where the emotional weight of the story truly hits. This wasn't a crime of impulse. This wasn't a sudden loss of control. This was something else entirely. And now we return to the question we started with. How does someone become capable of this? We're about to go deeper into that answer. And what you're going to hear next might change how you see people forever. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one no one suspects. Because now we step into the part of the story that is hardest to understand. Not just what happened, but how it happened. And more importantly, why, after confession, investigators needed details. A timeline, a sequence, something that could explain how a normal morning turned into something unthinkable. And what Chris Watts revealed next only made things more disturbing. He said when Sean and Watts came home that night, they had a conversation. Not loud, not explosive, just serious. She had questions about the distance, about the change in his behavior, about the truth she was starting to feel. And in that moment, everything that had been hidden surfaced. Then he claimed it escalated, and he strangled her, just like that. No warning, no second chance. But wait, because here's where it gets even more chilling. He said their daughters, Bella Watts and Celeste Watts, were still in the house, still alive. Now pause, because this is the part that stays with people, the part that's hardest to process. He didn't call for help. He didn't stop. He didn't turn himself in. Instead, he made a decision, and that decision would define everything that followed. He placed Shanann's body in his truck, and then he put his daughters in the vehicle too, alive, sitting in the back seat. Imagine that silence, that drive, that distance between what had already happened and what was about to happen. But wait, here's where it becomes almost impossible to comprehend. He drove to a remote oil site, a place he knew well, a place isolated enough that no one would see, and there he ended their lives. Take a second, because this isn't just information. This is reality. This is the moment the story shifts from shocking to deeply unsettling. And here's the loop we've been building toward. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't panic. This was control. Every step, every movement, every decision. Now ask yourself, what kind of mindset does that require? Because this is where psychology enters the story. On the surface, Chris Watts didn't fit the profile people expect. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't loud. He wasn't visibly unstable. He was quiet, compliant, almost invisible. And that's exactly what makes this case so disturbing. Because it challenges something we all believe, that we can recognize danger, that we can see it coming. But wait, here's where it gets even deeper. Investigators began analyzing his behavior leading up to the crime, and what they found was a pattern of emotional detachment. He had already mentally separated himself from his family, already imagined a life without them, already committed internally to a different future. And when reality didn't match that vision, he didn't adjust. He eliminated the obstacle. That's the part most people struggle with. Because for most of us, there are lines we cannot cross. No matter the pressure, no matter the desire. But for him, That line didn't exist. And here's another loop to think about. If someone can live a normal life, smile, laugh, interact, all while carrying that level of detachment, how many other people are out there like that? That's not just a question. That's what makes this story linger. Now, let's go back for a moment, because there's something else that doesn't sit right. After everything, after the crime, after the disposal, he went back home and acted normal, spoke to neighbors, texted people, went on camera. That level of composure? It wasn't accidental. It was calculated. But wait, because here's where the entire situation collapses. Evidence, digital footprints, phone records, location data, surveillance, all of it begins to close in, and suddenly, the version of reality he tried to create starts falling apart. Fast. When confronted, he confesses, then changes his story, then confesses again. Each version revealing more, each version exposing something darker. And this brings us to the motive, not rage, not revenge, not even desperation. Freedom. He wanted a new life, a clean slate, a version of reality where he could start over without consequences. But here's the problem. Reality doesn't work that way. And the cost of that illusion was everything. Before we go further, pause right here. If this story is affecting you, if it's making you think, hit like, subscribe for more deep, psychological true crime stories, and comment below, do you think this was planned from the beginning? Or did something snap in that moment? Because what we're about to explore next might change your answer. We're going to look at the aftermath, the courtroom, the final judgment, and the one thing that still doesn't make sense, because even now, there are questions that remain unanswered, and one of them might be the most disturbing of all, because now we reach the part where everything should feel resolved. The truth is out. The confession is on record. The world knows what Chris Watts did. So this is where the story ends, right? Not quite. After his final confession, the case moved quickly. There was no long trial, no dramatic courtroom battle. Instead, Chris Watts accepted a plea deal, guilty on all counts, and just like that, he was sentenced to multiple life terms in prison. No parole, no second chance, no escape. But wait, here's where it gets unsettling again, because even with the confession, even with the sentence, something still doesn't sit right. There was no full explanation, no deep emotional breakdown of why. No moment where everything suddenly made sense. Just fragments, pieces of a mindset we still struggle to understand. And this is where the story shifts from crime to consequence. In court, the focus turned to the victims, to Shauna Watts, to her daughters, Bella Watts, Celeste Watts, and the child she never got to meet. Statements were read. Grief filled the room. Pain that words couldn't fully carry. This wasn't just a case anymore. This was a family, erased, and here's the part that lingers. Not just what happened, but what was lost. A mother who shared her life with the world. 2 children who trusted completely. A future that was already unfolding. Gone. But wait, because even after the sentencing, the story didn't stop. From prison, Chris Watts continued speaking, giving interviews, revisiting the crime, adding new details, changing perspectives. And every time he spoke, people listened, trying to understand, trying to find logic in something that feels illogical. But here's the truth. Some actions don't come with satisfying answers. And that's what makes this case so haunting. We want a clear reason, a moment we can point to and say, that's when everything went wrong. But instead, we get silence, ambiguity, fragments of a mindset that doesn't fully translate. And this brings us back to the question we've been looping the entire time. How does someone go from ordinary to unimaginable? Was it gradual? Was it hidden? Was it always there? Or is the reality even more disturbing? That sometimes we just don't know. Now think about this. The signs were subtle. Distance, detachment, disconnection. Nothing that screamed danger. Nothing that made people step in. And that's the uncomfortable lesson here, because it forces us to confront something deeper. Not every threat looks obvious. Not every danger announces itself. Sometimes it smiles. It blends in. It lives right next door. Before we close the story, take a second. If this video pulled you in, made you think, made you feel something, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories that don't just inform, but stay with you. And comment below, what do you think really drove this? Was it control, escape, or something darker we still don't understand? Because conversations like this matter. They keep the victims remembered. They keep the truth alive. And as we end this, there's one final thought I want to leave you with. Not every story has a clean ending. Not every question gets answered. But every victim deserves to be remembered. Shannon Watts, Bella Watts, Celeste Watts, their story didn't end in that house. It continues in every conversation, every retelling, every moment someone chooses to remember. And the man who tried to erase them, Chris Watts, will spend the rest of his life with that truth. No escape, no rewriting the past, no forgetting, just silence and the weight of what he did. And maybe that's the only ending this story was ever going to have.